Back to our top story this evening, that despite being told we'd have $275 off our power bills by this year, electricity prices are set to increase yet again. It's bad for you, it's obviously bad for the government with an election around the corner and cost of living being far and away the top issue on people's minds. And this isn't just a small increase. The Australian Energy Regulator says it'll vary, but New South Wales residents are likely to cop the biggest whack of nearly 10%. And Chris Bowen, of course, says this is all the fault of coal. But to help cut through the government spin, Aidan Morrison, he's the Director of Energy Research at the Centre for Independent Studies. He joins me now. Aidan, is this all the fault of coal, as Chris Bowen says, or is it the fault of the war in Ukraine, as the Prime Minister says, or is it something else?
It's certainly the fault of neither of those things. The war in Ukraine has totally washed through the energy price system at the moment. What it probably is the fault of, at least in New South Wales' case, is Keane, Matt Keane. This is the first time we've seen the actual costs flow through from the renewables energy program, the big New South Wales electricity roadmap that he's produced as his signature piece of legislation when he was Energy Minister. And for the first time, we're seeing how those costs will actually flow through to consumers. And at the moment, about $500 million annually is assumed to be transferred to New South Wales consumers based on infrastructure like the Central West Arana Renewable Energy Zone, which is nowhere near yet constructed, or the Renewable Energy Zone in New England, which is nowhere near yet constructed. There could also be other costs passed on, including subsidies and underwriting for battery schemes and wind farms and solar farms that don't have a full commercial contract that covers their costs. These are the subsidy schemes that have been put in place, and now we're just starting to see the costs creep into consumers' bills, and they probably account for a couple of percentage points of why New South Wales sticks out above the rest. But the other states are going to catch up too when all their initiatives to force renewables into the system catch up into the regulatory system and start to have their costs added up too.
And the point I've been making is that Bowen isn't entirely incorrect when he says that coal is at fault here. But the reason coal is at fault is because you've had coal-fired power stations degraded because there's no investment in them, because they're about to be shut down anyway. All of the big energy operators say, you know, by 2035, most of them will be gone. So why would they be investing in a coal-fired power station today when there's big bucks to be made out of the subsidies that are put on renewable energy? That's why they fail every 5 minutes, because they're not being maintained. But then Bowen turns around and says, well, that's the fault of coal, as though it were the resource itself rather than the infrastructure that we're using to burn it.
That's exactly right. The open secret about the renewable energy transition is that they need everything else in the system to start operating in this ad hoc, up and down, totally intermittent pattern as well to work around renewables. And coal suffers most from that, which is designed to work in a steady state. Like pretty much all machinery works best in a relatively steady state. So yes, it does cop the worst of the heating up and cooling down that's required to ramp up and shut down all the time. But also, as you point out, when the industry is being told continually they have no future, there's no incentive to do the sorts of deep maintenance activities that would keep these things operating more stably. So there is some grain of truth to the idea that these have had some more unexpected outages than expected. However, it has also been grossly exaggerated as well. So, for example, there's been a common it's not quite technically a lie, but a common statement's been wheeled out time and time again to say there's not been a single day in the last 18 months or the last 2 years where there hasn't been an unforeseen coal outage. That is not because every day there has been a new coal-fired plant that has something blow up and go wrong. It's because a couple of years ago in Queensland, there was one coal power station that blew up really badly, and it's been off ever since. So on a really kind of poor technicality, the situation's been grossly exaggerated, and that was quite a new one as well. So really, coal is not nearly as unreliable as people actually are making out in this situation, but certainly there's been no incentive to do the deep kind of investment that would keep it operating smoothly and keeping downward pressure on prices consistently.
Well, as a resource, it's terribly reliable. That's why everyone else overseas is buying our coal. And that's what I quoted Peter Malinauskas earlier, saying, you know, this is the greatest policy failure of all time, that we are such a resource-rich country and everyone else is buying our resources, and yet we are paying more for energy in this country than the people who are buying energy resources from us. But what can we do, or what can be done about this in the short term? It seems almost impossible to turn around.
We've certainly put ourselves into a very tricky position, and I think it's actually fair to say that it's going to be a real challenge for whatever incoming government if they want to put downward pressure on electricity prices to actually achieve that. In particular, I think we've just started to see the very tip of a positive tsunami of additional transmission costs that are coming. As I said, this is the first time we've got a whiff of the state-based plans being shifted onto energy bills from the New South Wales electricity roadmap. So it's going to be to actually put short-term downward pressure, incoming governments are going to have to identify which projects really don't stack up economically and cancel the projects that have already been announced by previous governments, because we're just starting to see the tip of the iceberg, and I'm sure there is so much more that's going to come. The regulator has done their very best to kick every possible can further down the road. There are more concealed costs coming. There are still decisions that aren't finalised for the distribution networks that could actually see things go up even further. Further, they've compressed the retails. They've squeezed their screws as tight as they possibly can last year in order to avoid announcing a big increase. This year, they've kept those screws super tight, tighter than they should be, to allow new entrants to kind of come and keep new competition in the market. So there is certainly going to be, there is a pent-up dam of pressure, even in this determination, which is shown as a sort of up to 10% increase in New South Wales. There is so much more around the corner coming that it will be very, very hard and will require some very tough decisions to basically call out past mistakes and cancel projects that have been committed to that do not make economic sense, because those business cases were never there.
Indeed, and of course this infrastructure, it's regulatory assets, which essentially means there is guaranteed profit for the people who invest in it, and who pays that? You do in your power bills. It's a ridiculous situation. Aidan Morrison, thank you so much for your time.